was an untamed wilderness, early settlers ventured into an unknown world. The courage of these spirited pioneers is a part of McKeesport's living heritage. To study our heritage is to live over again this story of the past, to meet familiarly with great men and notable women, and to see the outcome of their actions more clearly than they themselves saw it. What they only dreamed, we know as reality. George Washington, accompanied by his guide, Christopher Gist, made the first definitive authentic record of a visit by a white man to the present site of McKeesport in 1753. Queen Aliquippa and her band of Senecas were the first permanent residents of the area in which the Youghiogheny joined the Monongahela River. She shared her vast western Pennsylvania territory with early English settlers in order to combat a common foe, the French.
When my grandmother was young, with her little ones, she said there were still Indians up in there. And an Indian would come in and look at her baby and pick it up, and then he would take her baby, but he left the Indian baby. She had what we called a bread dough. It was where they kept all their baked goods in the early days. The Indian would go to the bread dough and take out a piece of baked goods, maybe a cake or maybe bread, take the baked goods and the white baby and leave for the day. But when the sun began to set, they always came back with the white baby in good condition and took their Indian baby back home at night.
When David McKee settled here with his family in 1768, the area wasn't much more than a swampland, but they were determined to make their home in this Pennsylvania wilderness. As the desire for freedom from colonial oppression grew, war with Britain became inevitable. Men from the area were recruited to form the 8th Pennsylvania Regiment. This regiment marched 500 miles to join General Washington in New Jersey, and later fought in the battles of Brandywine and Germantown, passing the winters in camp at Valley Forge. In 1781, David McKee passed the deed to his lands to his son John, prior to his death at age 85 in 1795. John McKee, the founder of McKeesport, became one of the wealthiest men in western Pennsylvania through his real estate ventures. However, he would see his luck take a turn for the worse. Suddenly called upon to repay a loan he had guaranteed for his brother-in-law, McKee watched his accumulated wealth vanish. It was while caught in this financial bind that McKee conceived the idea of establishing a town out of his home plantation. Early in 1795, McKee placed an ad in the Pittsburgh Gazette, offering lots for a village called McKee's Ferry.
The lots were, if I recall correctly, were 60 by 140 feet. The main streets, Market and Walnut, ran north and south, and they were about 80 feet wide. But the number of streets ran east and west, and they weren't that wide. They were only 50 or 60 feet wide.
By 1796, 133 deeds have been purchased for $30 each. However, this new settlement was renamed McKeesport in order to avoid confusion with locations similarly named near the present site of McKee's Rocks and on the Susquehanna River. Prior to 1830, the town consisted of 18 houses, 1 church, 1 grist and sawmill, 4 general stores, 3 tavern owners, 2 blacksmiths, 1 physician, and a miscellaneous assortment of merchants. Change and growth would best describe McKeesport throughout the 1800s. As this thriving new town prospered, it brought about changes in city government, transportation, and educational and health facilities.
One day, looking at one of the old records in the City Hall, I found this printed article which said that Asaph Atwater was one of the signers to the petition to the Court of Common Pleas asking that the town of McKeesport be granted a charter to operate as a borough, and he was my great-grandfather.
The one-room red schoolhouse, which was built on Lower Market Street, has been moved to Renzi Park. and is still there for people to view.
A third-class city charter was obtained in 1891 with Thomas Tilbrook as the town's first mayor. Tilbrook appointed W.F. Young as chief of police, who in 1893 moved into the newly built Central Police and Fire Station on Market Street. McKeesport's first post office was established in February of 1827. Initially, mail was carried by young riders on horseback from Pittsburgh to the Monongahela River, where it was then ferried across to McKeesport. The appearance of steamboats in 1830 brought true rapid transit to McKeesport. With the canalization of the Monongahela River in 1841, McKeesport became a major center for steamboat construction. The era of steamboats and ferries neared an end, however, when McKeesport's first vehicle bridge, the old 3rd Avenue span, was erected in 1884. By this time, vast improvements were being made in land transportation. Just 27 years earlier, on a cold January day in 1857, most of McKeesport's 2,000 residents turned out to watch the Pittsburgh and Connellsville Railroad train make its first trip through the city. Local transportation came to McKeesport in 1887 with its first trolley car. This horse-pulled trolley ran over a single track in the middle of 5th Avenue. But after only a year of operation, the horses were shown to their stables as the car was switched over to electricity. Up until the early 1800s, all medical care was performed either at home or at Fort Pitt. It wasn't until 1894 that the town's first hospital, Old Main, was dedicated. At the turn of the century, smallpox, diphtheria, and typhoid fever were prevalent. Staffed by only 39 men, the under-equipped hospital struggled to meet the needs of the community. By 1908, 50 beds were added to the East Wing, bringing the total capacity to over 100. McKeesport is rich in its ethnic and cultural backgrounds, but it is equally rich in its forms of worship. McKeesport's early settlers, predominantly English and Scots, drew much strength from their deep-seated religious beliefs.
The whole thing started with circuit riders. They must have lived a very peculiar kind of life, running around on horseback and having services in barns, in saloons, in halls, anywhere they were. And a lot of the services were held in homes. The first circuit riders were, of course, Presbyterians and Methodists.
The First Presbyterian Church, sometimes referred to as Old First Church, was founded prior to 1784. And up to 1819, McKeesport was without a public place for religious worship. Our present church is the corner of Market and 6th Avenue, and was designated by John McKee in 1795 as reserved for a house of worship. In 1819, the first church building was built on this property, and it was used by all denominations.
In 1820, the Baptists left to form their own church. By the middle of the 19th century, Lutherans, Catholics, and other denominations were joining together in congregations. Strong religious beliefs were centered within McKeesport's ethnic groups that settled in the area around the close of the 19th century. Among those were the Greeks, whose numbers increased from 30 citizens in 1898 to about 150 families in 1960. In 1923, they banded together to form the Greek-American Progressive Association, an organization which sought to establish a church for the Greek Orthodox faith. A year later, their dream became a reality when they founded the Greek Community Center. The Poles came to McKeesport seeking a haven from religious and political persecution. Seeking to worship in their native tongue, they established a parish in 1893 under the patronage of St. Mary of Czestochowa. In addition, the close-knit Poles maintained their unity by forming numerous societies and organizations. By the 1870s, Slovak families began their settlement in what is now McKeesport's 6th Ward. They were attracted, along with many others, by jobs in the area's rapidly expanding industries and mines. In 1892, the Holy Trinity Protective Association was founded and began working toward the establishment of a Slovak church. Today, known as Holy Trinity Church and still in its original location on 7th Avenue, The McKeesport Slovak parish has grown from 50 families in 1895 to 600 today. Also drawn to the growing town of McKeesport were the Ukrainians, who in 1902 were represented by 40 families and 100 single persons. In that year, they purchased a building on the corner of Ringgold and Sinclair Streets and established the St. John Ukrainian Catholic Church. In the early 1880s, the first Serbians settled in the area, seeking a new home where they could enjoy freedom and reap the rewards of their labor. They brought their creative talents to the town of McKeesport, contributing to economic expansion and cultural enrichment of the area with the beliefs and customs of their Orthodox Christian faith. During the latter part of the 1800s, so many Irish immigrants joined St. Peter's Church that it became known as the Irish Church. Later, when their numbers continued to increase, they formed the St. Pius Church. In 1889, these strong-willed immigrants formed a division of the ancient order of Hibernians to preserve their culture and traditions. In 1910, the AOH Temple was built on 6th Avenue. This 4-story structure with its magnificent ballroom came to be known as the finest and largest Hibernian building in the nation. The Hungarians began immigrating in considerable numbers as early as 1880, with a large majority arriving between 1890 and 1910. Many settled in the first ward of McKeesport, which for many years was known as the Hungarian Quarter. With their numbers reaching over 5,000 by 1920, these frugal, hard-working immigrants helped form the backbone of local industry. The Italians settled in what are now the 3rd, 6th, and 11th wards. Italian immigrants formed numerous clubs and organizations and were peppered throughout local business, industry, and professions. The first Croatians settled around 1890 in the 2nd ward area. Initially, they held their religious and social functions in private homes. In 1894, they organized the first Croatian lodge, which later established the Croatian Church in 1907. In addition to organizing numerous fraternal and religious organizations, these education-minded citizens established the Sacred Heart School. Romanians first entering the area were primarily peasant farmers seeking a better way of life. In 1918, these Catholics of the Eastern Rite established a church in Christie Park, where most moved in order to preserve their culture and traditions. The first Jews came to McKeesport in the 1850s, attracted by commercial opportunities. It wasn't until a later wave of Hungarian Jews were drawn to the area by the local tube works that congregations began to form. In 1886, Hungarians organized the first Jewish congregation in McKeesport, the Gemilas Kesed. This was followed by the formation of the Russian Jews' Tree of Life congregation in 1894 and the Galician Sephard congregation in 1897. Who came from Austria-Hungary and Poland. All major religions are represented among McKeesport's wide range of ethnic and cultural groups. At one time, 4 noted McKeesport clergymen, 2 Protestant, 1 Catholic, and 1 Jewish, gained quite a reputation as spokesmen for their respective faiths. Known as the 4 Horsemen, these religious leaders were frequent panelists on stage and at speakers' tables at civic meetings around the area.
With the influx of people from all over God's half acre, we have a German church and a Slovak church. We have a Hungarian church, an Italian church, a Polish church. Practically every nationality had its own church, and the reason for that was it was their language, you see.
If this nation's ethnic diversity has earned it a reputation as the great melting pot, then McKeesport's pot must surely have been made of steel, for it was that.
The thing that made McKeesport prosperous was the coming of the United States Steel Corporation. There was first a W. Woods Company steel, but when U.S. Steel came in here and took in the whole lower part of the town from Walnut Street out to Riverton, blast furnaces and everything. And then people came in. That's when there was an influx into the community of people from Europe.
Although the resulting influx of immigrants had diverse cultural backgrounds, they shared a desire for a better way of life and the determination to build one. It was this common bond in spirit that joined them to greet the opportunities and face the challenges that lay ahead. The first major manufacturing industry in the area was Wood's Mill, erected in the northeast corner of Walnut and Water Streets in 1851. By the turn of the century, this sheet iron manufacturer, later known as W. DeWeese Wood Company, had grown from a 1-acre plant employing 35 men to a 9-acre facility employing over 1,000. The National Tube Works caused the area's greatest population surge after locating in McKeesport in 1872. Thousands from around the country and overseas poured into the city seeking work in this booming industry. By 1894, the Tube Works was the largest industrial establishment in the nation, employing 5,000 workers at full capacity. From 1870 to 1890, the town's population jumped from 2,500 to almost 21,000, doubling again to 42,000 in the next 20 years. The area's growing population created many commercial opportunities as well. Starting with little capital but great determination, many pursued the American dream and established thriving businesses. In 1911, G.C. Murphy sold the controlling interest of his chain of 10 stores to J.S. Mack and W.C. Shaw. These two ambitious businessmen built the small chain into what is today one of the largest retail operations in the country. Dry goods merchant Henry Herman Renziehausen also added his name to McKeesport's list of civic-minded business leaders. During the Great Depression, he unselfishly offered credit to the city when it was desperately needed. A living monument to his generosity is Renziehausen Park, which he transformed from a barren wasteland to a beautiful recreation center. While a handful of successful people such as these can certainly spur the development of a town, it is often adversity that brings out the best of the community as a whole. In 1907, disaster struck when 34 feet of water engulfed the streets, marking the worst flood in the town's history. Thousands were temporarily homeless, factories closed with losses of thousands of dollars, and nearly 20,000 workers were laid off in McKeesport and the surrounding neighborhoods of Versailles, Portview, and Duquesne. Mayor W.H. Coleman quickly formed a relief committee to deliver food by boat. The Chamber of Commerce joined in the relief efforts, feeding hundreds of families and providing emergency shelter for the homeless. Women and children were lodged and fed at the Elks Temple. Hundreds of others slept on cots in lodge halls in cultural centers throughout the area. In uniting to confront adversity, this blend of cultures helped forge the spirit that is the strength of America. This courage, this ability to rise above humble beginnings and succeed is our primary birthright, our gift from those who came before us. To the people who settled and built McKeesport, we owe our thanks and an obligation to remember, to preserve and protect the traditions and heirlooms of the past. History is an account of the actions and the fortunes of mankind's heritage. Such an account must be based upon reliable records which can be understood and interpreted. The records may be in the form of buildings, products of art, manufactured objects or writings. They may even be institutions, languages, or the survival of customs and religions. The Daily News, McKeesport's only daily newspaper, has been recording the accounts of the area for over 100 years. The look and production techniques of the Daily News have changed over the years, but it's much more than a newspaper. It's a community institution that has been providing historians with one of the most reliable accounts of the region for over a century. Unfortunately, it has been the exception for people to consciously hand down to their successors information about their own day. It often happens that certain records are preserved by the merest chance, while others, which would have been much more valuable, are lost. These conditions make it a very difficult task to obtain a true picture of a past age, to recover the habits and the customs of a society, to trace the effects of its action upon later times, and to understand the motives and the feelings of people who ceased to live many years or even centuries ago. More than this, McKeesport's heritage enlarges our experience, enables us to judge present issues and forecast the future through our knowledge of similar situations in the past. For these reasons, the McKeesport Heritage Center was founded.
I just mentioned it to a few of my friends, and they said it was a good idea. Why don't I do something? So I talked to the Penn State, which we have a local campus here in McKeesport, and they seemed to pick up the ball and said, well, why don't we all work together, and perhaps we could organize and get a room at the school for our purpose. So I talked to a few of my friends, and we held a meeting, and out of that meeting, everybody agreed that it was a good idea. We put together the board, had our first organized meeting, and went ahead from there.
It is in our past that we find the traditions and strengths that make a better tomorrow. The McKeesport Heritage Center. Join us and rediscover the pride of McKeesport.
Modern history is the story of the internal development and the outward expansion of nations, together with their conflicts. The chain of events that led to this nation's development was also reflected in the drive and determination of McKeesport's people. The fertile land of McKeesport, first cultivated by Queen Aliquippa's tribe and later by various emigrating religious groups, was altered forever with the introduction of machinery that broke the chains that bound man to the soil. An era of plenty replaced the tyranny of scarcity. But the new industrial reorganization did not come easily. Accompanying social injustices created unrest that led to World War I. Nearly 6,000 McKeesporters signed up for the armed forces when war was declared against Germany. 187 McKeesport soldiers were recruited by none other than Lillian Russell, sex symbol of her day, who visited the city on behalf of the U.S. Marines.
Yes, they did a lot of recruiting here in McKeesport. A famous actress came here, Lillian Russell. She came here on recruiting. I went in October the 19th, 1915. The war broke out April the 6th, 1917. I was not quite 19 when it broke out. I signed up as apprentice seaman in Pittsburgh, $17.60 a month. That's what I got. And out of that $17.60 a month, I had to send my mother 10. So I didn't have too much to go around with, did I? Huh?
McKeesport sent 2,181 men and 36 women into the war. 48 men and 2 women never came back. There was suffering on the home front, too. Scores of McKeesport women nursed victims of the great influenza epidemic of 1918. So many McKeesporters fell ill that the city officially closed all public offices for a few months, and an emergency hospital was established in Olympia Park. World War I vets returned to a nation altered by a new attitude. The Roaring Twenties had arrived, bringing voting rights and bobbed hair for women. Talking pictures swept the nation, with McKeesport being the second city in the country to show the first talkie, Warner Brothers' Don Juan. Despite its frivolity, the 20s was legally a dry decade. However, speakeasies and distilleries, such as the old Thomas Moore Distillery, where the famous Possum Hollow whiskey was made, proliferated in the McKeesport area. The Tube City Brewery, in business since 1902, turned to the manufacture of near beer. The brewery's white label beer and Canadian-style ale returned following the repeal of Prohibition. Corruption and thievery infested the government during the 20s. The administration of President Warren Harding was marred by the Teapot Dome scandal. A few months later, Harding died suddenly in San Francisco. As the train made its way back to the nation's capital, it traveled through McKeesport, and citizens placed pennies on the rails. Many McKeesporters saved these flattened coins as souvenirs of their participation in a national event.
This is station 2RS Dublin calling. The American flyer Lindbergh passed over the...
Ici Radio Paris. Un bateau pêcheur près de Cherbourg vient de nous informer que l'aéroplane de Lindbergh est arrivé à la côte de France à 3 heures.
Thomas in New York. He made it. Charles A. Lindbergh, Lucky Lindy as they call him, landed at...
American heroes have always reflected their times, and so it was with Charles Lindbergh. Lucky Lindy mirrored the unabashed optimism and youthful spirit of the United States during the 20s. In the spring of 27, Lucky Lindy landed at Bettis Field, where he signed the register before taking to the skies again. 22 years later, the field was bought to house a Westinghouse plant. The Bettis name remains today.
Brother, can you spare a dime?
The buoyant spirit of America was soon dashed. Mirroring images across the land, McKeesport families stood in bread lines. At the corners of Market and Walnut Streets, ham was 9 cents a pound, but no one could afford it. The mills had closed or operated with skeleton staffs. Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal took office on March 4th, 1933. 2 days later, he shut down the nation's banks. The First National Bank of McKeesport, Union National, McKeesport National, and People's City Banks among them.
Well, our bank was always considered extremely, and was extremely conservative. So we had no trouble whatsoever. Of course, we closed for the several days, but when Roosevelt permitted the opening, we opened immediately. And we were the only bank in the area that did open immediately. People did most anything. For instance, the men sold apples on the corner, and we had organizations that would have soup kitchens, you know. My father died when I was 17, and I had my mother and sister to support. And on $65 a month, you can imagine that I had to pull the belt pretty tight.
A reflection of the hard times were the crowds at the Memorial and other movie houses where an afternoon of escape cost only a nickel. The Casino Theater was a bargain. If it wasn't too crowded, children were admitted at the rate of 2 for a nickel. This was the golden era of Busby Berkeley musicals as well as of the serial. McKeesporters temporarily left the Depression behind when following the adventures of Tom Mix or Buck Rogers, or on radio, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way.
While America struggled with the Depression, the rest of the world became engaged in a struggle of far greater scope. On December 7th, 1941, the United States and McKeesport families joined in that struggle, which began with the bombing at Pearl Harbor. Everyone learned how to handle ration cards for food and gasoline, while local industry joined the war effort, supplying the Army and the Navy with bombs and shells.
I think the whole attitude of the nation, as well as the residents in the community in the McKeesport area, changed. We were at war. A peacetime draft was not popular, no question about it. But when the war broke out, I think patriotism took over. When I entered the service in August 1942, I enlisted in the Air Force. And wouldn't you know it, that I did come across several of the draftees that I had helped draft. It was a happy situation for all of us to know that the war had ended, knowing, and I'm sure it was all over the country and all over the world, that now we get out of the service permanently and go back to our business of being civilians.
Whatever the conflict, McKeesport's young men and women served their country well. Many gave their lives. However, many came back to re-enter the local workforce. Little did McKeesporters know they were previewing history when two freshman members of the U.S. House of Representatives came here to debate the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. The congressmen were 29-year-old John Kennedy and 34-year-old Richard Nixon. The McKeesport Daily News was prophetic when it pointed out how poorly Nixon photographed compared to Kennedy. For this was the national consensus 13 years later when the two debated for the presidency. The romantic period the United States enjoyed was reflected in McKeesport life, but that period was shattered with the assassination of John F. Kennedy 13 months after his visit to McKeesport.
Yesterday,
the world changed at an incredible pace in the 60s. One reflection of this change in McKeesport was the demise of the trolley after 80 years when the old 56 made its last run. Over 100 years ago, the railroad opened the way to industrial growth and progress as trains passed on the outskirts of McKeesport. But the railroad, like the city, expanded, and there was a growing public opinion that the tracks would have to go. Many plans were formulated for over 30 years to eliminate the rail crossings from downtown McKeesport. An incredible era passed in 1970 as a B&O train pulled away from the Fifth Avenue station for the last time. Thousands of McKeesport residents were there to mourn its passing.
There were more people in that square down there that you could shake a stick at. My paintings, I guess, are all over the country someplace. And I did pretty well with them. I got this idea, I don't know how, but when I looked around McKeesport and saw what it was, I thought that this would be something that might go well for a period of time to see the city here as it was. It was an obsession with me. I wanted to paint the city. No, it's the greatest thing that I think that I could have done.
McKeesport was untouched during the turbulent 70s when the rest of the nation experienced student unrest, strikes, the unpopular conflict in Vietnam, and civil rights riots. Perhaps the only thing that saved America during those violent days was the hope and optimism represented by our triumphs in space.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
McKeesporters have always been fascinated by space. Percy A. Garland had a part in the Apollo 12 mission with the development of a data recording camera for a reactor that is on the moon today. Although McKeesport is ordinarily thought of as an industrial city, it's also the second largest commercial center in Allegheny County and the financial center for the area. Many well-established firms flourished in the community. Some are still here today. Others have faded into the past. But in all, they contributed to the growth and vigor of the city. The opening of the Midtown Plaza was evidence of business's confidence in the people of McKeesport. The spirit of America was mirrored on the faces of McKeesport residents during the nation's bicentennial year. The city was one of only 3,000 across the country designated as an official bicentennial community. That same year, flames broke out in a vacant building and spread throughout the downtown area, resulting in the greatest fire of the city's history. The $4 million blaze destroyed the Elks Temple, Market Street School, and numerous buildings that housed small businesses. In the rubble lay the ruins of city landmarks which will be lost forever. This tragedy, which would have destroyed the spirit of many small cities, served as a rallying point for McKeesporters. McKeesport truly mirrors the spirit of the nation today as we near the close of the 20th century. The tradition of McKeesport's past will lead to tomorrow's future strength. To be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to be ever a child. For what is man's lifetime unless the memory of past events is woven with those of earlier times? These words, written by Cicero over 2,000 years ago, apply today to the cultural, social, and economic developments and events that influenced our past. Truly, McKeesport's heritage has helped forge the spirit that mirrors the strength of America.